A November afternoon in Linden Hollow, Vermont. Owen Brackett knelt on the porch of 14 Old Mill Road, hammering a loose plank. Wren, his 10-year-old daughter, sat beside him folding paper cranes. A black Audi turned into the drive. The door opened. A woman stepped out, gray wool coat, brown hair pulled back, a small, faded paper crane between her fingers. She walked to the foot of the porch. Owen looked up, hammer still in his hand. She spoke 4 words. "Do you remember me?" Owen's hammer slipped from his fingers and clattered down the steps. He did not move. The wind shifted through the maples along the road, and for a moment the only sound was the rasp of dry leaves brushing the gravel. Wren had stopped folding. She watched her father's face go very still, then turned to study the woman. The flashback opened on a different December, 12 years earlier, when the snow on Old Mill Road had been falling for 3 days without pause. Owen Brackett was 26 then. He and Hannah had been married 2 years. They had inherited the house from his grandfather and were halfway through repairing it, half the windows still framed in plastic sheeting, the kitchen floor pulled up to the joists. Hannah worked nights at Windham Regional Hospital. Owen drove 40 minutes to a law office in Hartford on weekdays, where he was an associate in his 4th year of practice. That night, around 10, Owen pulled on his coat to fetch a crowbar from the tool shed behind the house. The drifts came up to his knees. He found the shed door half open, and behind a stack of split pine, a child crouched against the wall. She was perhaps 11, a thin coat, one sneaker, her right foot bare and gray. Her lips had gone the color of bruised plums. She bolted when she saw him. Owen did not chase her. He stood in the doorway and said only, "Don't be scared. There's a fire inside." She came back 10 minutes later, shivering so violently her teeth made a small, dry sound. Hannah set down the kettle and crossed the room before Owen had finished closing the door. She wrapped the child in a wool blanket, pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, then to her throat. Mild hypothermia. No frostbite, but close. The girl gave her name as Lila. No last name. She would not say where she had come from. She only said, "I don't want to go back to the old house." Hannah did not press her. She made cocoa. She brought down a pair of dry socks from the upstairs closet. Owen called the county social services line and was told the office would not reopen until morning. He hung up and looked at his wife. Hannah said what they were both thinking. They could not put a child back into the snow. 3 weeks. That was what Lila stayed. On Sunday mornings, Hannah taught her to make cornbread, measuring out flour into a dented tin cup. Owen took Hannah's old leather shoes, small, narrow, brown, out to the shed and hammered new soles onto them so they would fit Lila's feet. One evening at the kitchen table, he taught her to fold her first paper crane. Hannah had taught him during her residency at the children's ward, years before, when waiting rooms needed something to put in small hands. Lila did not speak much. Her gray-blue eyes watched everything. By the 2nd week, she had folded 20 cranes and hung them by white thread along the window of the room they had given her. Marlon Quist from County Social Services arrived on the 22nd day. He was in his early 50s then, soft-spoken, careful. He brought a folder. A couple in Burlington, the Whitcombs, 2 retired teachers, no children of their own, were ready to begin formal placement. Background checks done. House inspected. He was sorry to take her so quickly, but the system did not give them long windows. Lila did not cry. She held the first paper crane Owen had folded for her, the one with the slightly crooked left wing. Before she climbed into Marlon's car, she pressed something small into Owen's hand. It was the smallest crane she had folded herself, no bigger than a thumbnail. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than I will." Hannah held her for a long time. Lila whispered something into her ear that Owen did not catch. Then the door closed, and Marlon's sedan rolled out through the snow and disappeared at the bend in Old Mill Road. Owen and Hannah stood on the porch in the falling snow. Hannah said, "Do you think she'll be all right?" Owen answered, "I hope so." Cut back. 1 frame. Owen, now 38, still standing on the porch at 14 Old Mill Road, hammer at his feet, looking at the woman who had spoken 4 words. He stepped down from the porch and brought her inside. Wren followed at a careful distance, curiosity overriding her caution. The woman crouched at the bottom step and offered her hand. "I'm Della. Wren tilted her head. You're a judge, right? I saw you on the news. Della nodded once. She did not smile, but something in her face softened. That's right. In the kitchen, Owen put the kettle on. He could not yet say her old name. 12 years had set itself between them like a shut door, and he did not know how to push it open. He turned from the counter. Why are you back in Linden Hollow? Della reached into her coat pocket. She placed the small, faded crane on the table between them. I brought it back to the right address. Owen sat down. He picked up the crane and laid it flat in his palm. The paper had yellowed. The crooked left wing was still crooked. She told him about the Whitcombs. Margaret had taught 4th grade for 30 years. Theodore had taught American history at Burlington High. They had not been able to have children, 2 miscarriages. Then they stopped trying. They had treated her as their own from the day she walked into their kitchen. She had legally changed her name at 14, with their blessing. Yale Law in 2019. 3 years clerking for a federal judge in the Second Circuit. She had come back to Vermont in 2024 and taken the bench. She asked about Hannah. Owen looked at the window for a long moment. She passed in 2017. A car accident. Della lowered her head. I'm sorry, Marlon told me, last week. I needed to hear it from you. Then she opened the leather folio she had brought. She took out an envelope and slid it across the table. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a copy of the temporary placement form Owen had signed in 2014. He recognized his own handwriting. The second was a printout from the Connecticut Bar Association website. Owen R. Brackett, Esquire, bar number 44,217, Hartford, Connecticut. Active 2011 through 2017. Inactive thereafter. Della watched him read it. You never told me you were a lawyer. Owen set the page down. The wind pulled a fresh wave of leaves past the window. I left the practice when Hannah died. I couldn't be a single father and stand in a courtroom at the same time. Della closed the folder. She had not come to him as a judge. She had come because of a promise she had carried in her head for 12 years to find the man who had given her the first 3 warm weeks of her life. She had no intention of telling him she sat on the bench at Wyndham Superior. She did not know yet what that information would cost him. Wren came in carrying a paper crane she had just finished. She held it out to Della. Can you fold them? Della took the crane. Her fingers trembled slightly. I can. I learned from someone very good. They sat at the kitchen table and folded together for a long while, not speaking. Owen stood at the window with his back to them, watching the maples shed. Della stayed for dinner. Owen made spaghetti, nothing more than jarred sauce and dried herbs from the cupboard. Wren talked about her science teacher, about a girl in her class who had brought a snake to show and tell. Della laughed. It was the kind of laugh that surprised her, that had not surfaced for months. When she left, she stood beside her car with the door open. I'll be in Linden Hollow for a week. Can I come back? Owen nodded. She drove away. Her headlights swept across the worn green sign at the turn Old Mill Road. Inside the car, she dialed her court clerk and said, Cancel my docket for this week. I need to stay here. In the kitchen, Owen pulled open the bottom drawer of his work desk. He lifted out an old leather case he had not opened in 9 years. He set it on the table. He did not open it. 2 days later, Thursday morning, a courier in a brown jacket came up the walk and handed Owen a certified envelope. He opened it on the porch. Vereen Properties LLC versus Owen Brackett. Civil action filed in Wyndham Superior Court. The complaint alleged $78,400 in unpaid property tax assessments. The remedy sought was foreclosure on 14 Old Mill Road and adjacent acreage. First hearing in 8 days. Owen read each page carefully on the steps. The reassessment had increased his property tax by 340% in a single year. He had received no notice of revaluation. Attached was a building code violation report dated August 14th of the current year, signed by Inspector Eldon Pike. Owen knew Eldon. He had retired in June. He went inside and called Della. She picked up on the second ring. She was at the Maple Ridge Inn at the edge of town. She had not yet left, as she had said. She arrived in 20 minutes. She came in without knocking. She took her coat off and laid it across the back of a chair. Owen handed her the summons in silence. She sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, once quickly, once slowly with her finger moving along the line. Her face drained slowly. Then she set the papers down very carefully, as if they were hot. The first hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Wyndham Superior Court, Courtroom 3, Presiding Judge, Della Whitcomb. She looked across the table. Owen had not yet realized. Owen, I'm the presiding judge in Courtroom 3. The silence stretched. Wren was at school. The house was quiet enough that they could hear the refrigerator cycle on. Della explained the ethics rule slowly, with her hands folded. She had a right and a duty to recuse herself the moment she discovered any personal connection to a litigant. But if she recused now, the case would transfer down to Judge Cyrus Barden. Vereen had donated $12,000 to Barden's campaign in 2022. The contributions were a matter of public record. Owen understood. He spoke quietly. You can't sit on my case. The rule is clear. Della answered just as quietly. I'll file a recusal, but I'm going to do it after the first hearing. I need one session on the bench to require Vereen to put every document on the record. That creates the foundation to refer the case to the Attorney General if the fraud surfaces. Barden will inherit the file, but he'll inherit it with my notes already public. Owen waited. It was a gray space. Della added, You'll need a lawyer. He shook his head. There isn't a lawyer in this town who'll go up against Vereen. I'll represent myself. Della looked at him. You haven't practiced in 9 years. I still remember. She left an hour later. Owen sat at the table with the leather case. This time he opened it. Inside were the bound case file from State v. Reyes, 2013, a photograph of Hannah taken on the porch the autumn before she died, and the small paper crane, the one Lila had pressed into his palm. He sat with the crane in his hand for a long time. The paper had grown brittle at the edges. The wings were still folded clean. He thought of all the years it had sat in a drawer and waited. He thought of his Hartford office, the rows of bound briefs along the wall, the way his voice had once filled a courtroom without his having to think about it. He understood something had changed. He was no longer only a carpenter. Monday morning, Courtroom 3 at Wyndham Superior. Owen arrived alone, wearing the only suit he still owned from his Hartford years, a dark blue shirt and gray slacks, the jacket left at home because it no longer fit through the shoulders. Across the aisle, 4 lawyers sat at the plaintiff's table. The lead counsel was Brent Halloran, a partner at Halloran & Quinn in Burlington. He had argued before the Vermont Supreme Court 11 times. He did not look up when Owen took his seat. Della entered. She and Owen did not let their eyes hold for more than a second. 2 reporters from the Linden Hollow Bulletin sat in the back row with notebooks open. Halloran rose first. He laid out the prayer for relief foreclosure within 30 days. He submitted 4 documents into the record: tax reassessment, building violation report, original tax contract. Demand letter. Owen rose. For the first time in 9 years, his voice came out in the cadence of a courtroom. Your Honor, the defendant moves to assert 3 procedural objections under Rule 12, subsection B, of the Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure. The room turned to look at him. Halloran's pen stopped moving. He had not done his homework. He had not known that the man across the aisle had once held a Connecticut bar number. Della granted leave to speak, her voice neutral. Owen laid out the 3 objections one at a time. First, the inspector who signed the building violation report, Eldon Pike, had retired from the Wyndham County Building Department on June 3rd. The report was dated August 14th. The signature was therefore void on its face. Second, under Title 32, Section 4111 of Vermont statutes, a property owner is entitled to 30 days written notice of any reassessment exceeding 25%. Owen had received no such notice. The reassessment was procedurally defective. Third, the back tax claim attached to the property predated his ownership. It belonged to the prior title holder, his late grandmother Edith Brackett, who had died in 2010. Under Vermont's homestead exemption inheritance statute, the lien did not transfer to the heir. Halloran objected. Della overruled, then issued her order. The court will take the objections under advisement. Plaintiff is directed to produce the original inspection report within 72 hours. Next hearing will be Thursday of next week. She brought the gavel down once. Afterward, she stayed in chambers. She drafted a recusal order on her own letterhead and signed it. Reason for recusal: historical personal relationship with the defendant, discovered after commencement of proceedings. She placed the signed order in her desk drawer. She would file it after Thursday, after Halloran had been compelled to put every document into the record. She walked out to the parking lot. Owen was leaning against the rear bumper of his pickup truck. She stopped 3 steps away. "You did well. You were harder than I expected." "I had to be. If I'd softened anything, Halloran would have appealed on bias before the day was out. Do you understand?" Owen nodded once. She walked on. Wren was waiting in the cab of the pickup. She had asked to skip school for the day. Owen had said yes because he did not know what else to say. As he climbed in, she asked, "Was Della really tough on you in there, Dad?" She was doing her job. That night, in her room at the Maple Ridge Inn, Della sat at the small desk and opened her laptop. She typed Owen's full legal name into the Connecticut Bar database. The record loaded. 6 years of practice. 37 cases tried. Pro bono work cited in the Hartford Courant for State versus Reyes, a Latino teenager wrongly charged with second-degree assault. Owen had won an acquittal in a jury trial that had gone 4 days. She closed the laptop and walked out to the small balcony. The lights of Linden Hollow lay scattered through the trees below. Saturday afternoon, Holcomb Vereen drove a black Range Rover up the gravel of Old Mill Road. He stepped out wearing a long charcoal coat and leather gloves. He did not knock. He climbed the porch steps and waited until Owen came outside. He brought what he called a goodwill offer, $180,000 in cash, for a voluntary surrender of the property prior to judgment. The fair market value of the house and land was at least $420,000. Owen knew it. Vereen knew that he knew it. Owen invited him to sit on the porch. He did not invite him into the house. Wren was inside, drawing in the front room, the door closed. Vereen spoke softly. "You're an educated man, Mr. Brackett. I had my office pull your bar record over the weekend. So you understand that this fight is not equally matched. I can make life difficult for you and for your daughter in ways you have not yet imagined." Owen stood up and opened the porch door. "I'd like you to leave." Vereen rose without hurry. At the bottom of the steps, he turned. "Thursday's hearing, Mr. Brackett. You'll see. And the pretty judge, she isn't going to be able to protect you forever." Owen went still. Vereen did not know that Della was Lila, but he had watched enough to suspect there was more between them than judicial neutrality. Owen kept his face flat until the Range Rover pulled out onto Old Mill Road. That night, Sunday, just past 11, a stone came through Wren's bedroom window. The glass shattered across her bed. Wren screamed. Owen ran upstairs and pulled her into his arms and called the sheriff's office. Police Chief Brody Vereen arrived in 10 minutes. He was Holcomb's nephew by marriage. He took notes, walked the perimeter with a flashlight, and found nothing. Probably some kids horsing around. "We'll keep an eye on the road." Owen did not argue. He set up a folding cot in his own room and tucked Wren into it for the night. She fell asleep clutching a paper crane. Monday morning, Della arrived at the house without calling first. She saw the broken window from the driveway. She did not say anything. She helped Owen measure the frame, then drove with him to Hollow Hardware on Main Street. They bought a new pane of glass, a tube of silicon caulk, and 4 planks of pine for the cot frame. Della paid at the register. Owen tried to stop her. She said, "Consider it the shoes." They drove back and replaced the window together. Wren sat on the porch with crayons, drawing the 3 of them inside a square frame. Della held the pane steady. Owen turned the screws. Their hands brushed twice. Neither of them pulled back right away. Neither of them said anything. That evening, Della drove out to Cedar Brook to see Marlon. The Parkinsons had progressed since spring. His left hand shook when he reached for his teacup. She told him about the broken window. Marlon listened. Then he opened the drawer of the small table beside his bed and pulled out a craft envelope. He held it in both hands. "You're going to need this on Thursday." Della opened it. Inside was a printed copy of an email. The sender address ended in vereenproperties.com. The recipient was Marlon's old county email account, date stamp 3 months earlier. Holcomb Vereen had offered Marlon a private suite at Cedar Brook, valued at $4,200 per month, if Marlon would sign an affidavit confirming building code violations at 14 Old Mill Road. Marlon had refused, but he had kept the email. Thursday. Second hearing. Halloran called his expert witness, a former county building inspector, who claimed he had reviewed the files and confirmed the violations. But under Owen's cross-examination, the witness admitted he had not personally inspected the property and could not produce the original signed report. Della made a note on her bench docket. Just before she announced a 15-minute recess, the courtroom clerk passed her a folded slip of paper. She read it once. Owen, who had been informed by Della's text that morning, rose. "Your Honor, the defense moves to call an additional witness." Della granted the motion. Marlon Quist was wheeled into the courtroom in a folding wheelchair. He was thinner than at the last visit. He took the oath with his right hand on the Bible. He testified that during his 31 years with Windham County Social Services, he had visited the Brackett property 8 times. 4 visits in 2014 during Lila's temporary placement, 4 follow-up welfare checks for Wren in the years after Hannah's death, as part of the standard county protocol for households where a child had recently lost a parent. He stated, on the record, that no building code violations had been observed at 14 Old Mill Road during any of those visits. The roof had been sound. The wiring had been to code. The foundation had not shifted. He had documented the property's condition each time in the standard county welfare report, copies of which were on file in the Windham County Records Office and could be subpoenaed within the hour. Then he asked the bailiff to enter the email into evidence. Halloran shot to his feet. He objected on grounds of authentication. The email could be fabricated. Della granted the request for verification on the spot. The court's IT specialist examined the message header, traced the SMTP server to the Vereen property's internal mail system, and confirmed the message was authentic. The courtroom went quiet. Holcomb Vereen, seated in the front row, lost the color in his face. He stood and pushed past his counsel toward the back doors. Halloran rose to stop him. Vereen did not stop. Della tapped the gavel once, lightly. "This court will recess. The case file will be referred to the Office of the Vermont Attorney General for criminal review. The defendant is released from any temporary order of foreclosure. I will personally file a recusal within the next 24 hours. The remaining civil matter will be reassigned by direct order of the Vermont Supreme Court to a judge outside this district." She closed her notebook and stepped down. In the hallway, Owen found Marlon by the elevator. He bent and put both arms around the older man. Marlon spoke into his shoulder. "I kept my word to Lila that day. She told me not to forget the way back." Owen could not answer. He walked out into the late afternoon. Della was standing beside her car in the parking lot, her black robe still folded over her arm. He crossed the asphalt and stopped a few feet away. 12 years, Lila." She turned toward him. For the first time since her return, she did not speak as a judge. "I never really left that house, Owen. They stood in the lot a long time. They did not embrace. They did not reach for each other. They simply stood side by side and looked toward the spire of the Linden Hollow Town Hall while the November sun settled behind the maples. That evening, Della drove out to Old Mill Road. The recusal order had been filed by courier with the Chief Judge's office in Montpelier. She was no longer the presiding judge on Vereen versus Brackett. She was, for the first time since her arrival, simply Della, or Lila, or both at once. Owen brought 2 mugs of tea out to the porch. Wren brought a wool blanket from the hall closet, said goodnight to Della, and went inside to bed. She had grown used to the rhythm of Della's visits. They talked slowly. Della filled in the parts she had skipped before. Margaret Whitcomb had taught 4th grade in Burlington for 30 years. Theodore had taught American history. 2 miscarriages. Then they had stopped trying. They had treated her as their own from the first night. She still drove up to Burlington every other weekend to see them. They were in their 70s now. Margaret's hands had begun to shake the way Marlon's did. She had changed her name legally at 14. She told him for the first time the name she had been born with, Eleanor Pruitt. She had picked the name Lila herself when she ran from her mother's house at 10. Her mother had drunk through most of her childhood. Her mother's boyfriend had been worse. She did not know who her father was. She had walked and hitched rides for 6 weeks before she reached Linden Hollow that December night. Her birth mother had died in 2018. Cirrhosis. Della had not gone to the funeral. She had picked Della from Margaret's grandmother, Whitcomb from her adoptive parents. She had written her Yale Law admissions essay about 3 weeks with a man and a woman who had saved her without asking where she came from. Owen told her about Hannah, the accident on Route 4, the winter of 2017. Hannah had been driving home from a night shift. The road was iced. A truck coming the other way had lost control on the bend. Ren had been 18 months old. He had stopped practicing because he could not run a household alone and stand in a courtroom 12 hours a day. He had taken up carpentry, his grandfather's old trade, because he had needed to hold something solid in his hands instead of arguments. Della asked, quietly, "Do you regret it?" "I don't regret leaving the law. I regret not looking for you. I told myself you had a better family than I could give. I told myself I had no right. You had a right. You were the first person in my life who showed me what a warm house felt like." The screen door creaked. Ren came out in her flannel pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Della, then at her father, then at Della again. She reached into the pocket of her pajamas and pulled out a small folded crane. "Dad says anybody who can fold a paper crane is a good person. Can you fold them?" Della took the crane in both hands. She had not cried in a courtroom in 6 years on the bench. She cried now, very quietly, the tears falling onto the wool blanket and disappearing into the weave. Owen said nothing. He set his hand on her shoulder for 3 seconds, then drew it back. Ren climbed into Della's lap as if she had done it many times. Della wrapped both arms around her. She spoke into Ren's hair. "I can fold them. I learned from someone very good." The three of them sat on the porch together, a thin mist along the edge of the yard, the yellow light from the kitchen falling out across the floorboards. No one said anything more. 2 weeks later, the Office of the Vermont Attorney General opened a formal investigation into Vereen Properties, LLC. The email Marlon had preserved became the basis for a search warrant on Vereen's office. Investigators found documentation of tax reassessments manipulated for 17 other properties in Linden Hollow over 6 years. Total estimated fraud, $3.4 million. The Linden Hollow Town Council called an emergency vote. By a margin of 5-2, Holcomb Vereen was removed as council chair. The 2 dissenting votes belonged to Patricia Hollings and Edmund Crail, both council members who had quietly received undisclosed payments from Vereen Properties. Both were placed under separate investigation. Police Chief Brody Vereen was suspended pending an internal review of the broken window case and 3 other unsolved harassment complaints in the township. The civil case, Vereen versus Brackett, was reassigned to Judge Carmen Lyle, brought in by direct order of the Vermont Supreme Court. She dismissed the complaint on the merits at the first procedural conference. Owen was awarded full reimbursement of legal costs from Vereen Properties. He filed paperwork to reactivate his bar membership. Della helped him fill out the Vermont reciprocity application from Connecticut. Within the first month, he had taken on 8 pro bono cases, all residents of Linden Hollow, who had been pressured by similar manufactured tax assessments and had been too afraid to fight. Della returned to her duties on the Burlington bench. But every weekend, she drove the 2 hours back to Linden Hollow. Ren met her at the door each Saturday with a new paper crane. They had begun a collection along the front room window. 37 cranes hung there now, suspended on white thread. One Sunday morning, Della helped Owen mend the back fence. Ren ran in the yard with the neighbor's old yellow Labrador. Della was hammering a slat into place when her hand slipped and the hammer twisted in her grip. Owen caught her wrist before the hammer struck her thigh. He held it a moment longer than he needed to. Neither of them spoke. Della went back to driving the nail. Her face was a little flushed. It was not from the cold. Owen had brought Marlon home from Cedar Brook by then. He had converted the old tool shed into a small one-room cottage with a wheelchair ramp and a wood stove. Marlon sat on the porch in the afternoons and watched Ren fold cranes at the kitchen table through the window. He said to Owen one evening, "I lived long enough to see this. I waited 12 years to see those 3 under one roof." Della stayed for Sunday dinner. Owen baked salmon with lemon and butter. Ren had won the school writing contest with a piece called "The Woman Who Came Back." Della laughed at the way Ren told the story, mimicking the principal's voice. It was a kind of laughter Della had not produced in 12 years. After Ren had gone to bed, Della and Owen sat at the kitchen table with the dishes still stacked in the sink. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Della rested her hand flat on the table near his coffee mug. Owen looked at it but did not move his own. The silence was not awkward. It had begun to feel like the shape of something they were both growing used to. When Della finally rose to leave for the inn, she lingered at the door an extra beat. Owen walked her to her car. The maples along the road had lost the last of their leaves. December. The first snow of the season. Linden Hollow lay under a soft white cover. Della drove out to Old Mill Road early, before Wren was up. She walked around to the back of the tool shed. She stood at the exact spot where she had crouched against the wall 12 winters ago. Owen came out onto the porch and saw her. He pulled on his coat and walked down through the snow to stand beside her. "You still remember the spot?" "I never forgot. I counted 17 steps from the old maple tree to the shed door. I counted them that night to keep myself from passing out." He held something out to her. A small bundle wrapped in old brown paper. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside were the leather shoes. Hannah's shoes, narrow and brown, with the new soles Owen had hammered on 12 winters earlier. He had kept them on a high shelf in the tool shed all that time. Della held the shoes in both hands. This time she did not cry. She smiled, a slow smile that came from a deep place. "I came back to repay the kindness. I think I understand now that I never really left." Owen did not answer in words. He pulled her gently to him and held her. It was not the embrace of old acquaintances, and it was not the embrace of a former judge and a former defendant. It was the embrace of two people who had been waiting 12 years without knowing they were waiting. The snow fell lightly across his shoulders. Della rested her forehead against his collar. He did not say anything. In the upstairs window, Wren appeared, sleepy and still in her pajamas. She looked down at them. She smiled. She did not call out. She returned to her notebook on the desk and drew what she had just seen. That spring, Holcomb Vereen was indicted on 11 counts in federal court: tax fraud, public corruption, witness tampering. His criminal trial was scheduled for May at the federal courthouse in Burlington. The new town council formally invited Owen to serve as municipal legal counsel for Linden Hollow. He accepted the position. 3 days a week, no salary. He used the office above the old library, 2 doors down from the courthouse where the entire matter had begun. Marlon Quist died quietly in his sleep one night in late January. He went without pain. Owen and Della stood beside each other at the small graveside service at Pine Ridge Cemetery. The minister read a short passage. 6 people stood around the open grave: Owen, Della, Wren, 2 former colleagues from Cedar Brook, and a niece who had driven down from St. Albans. Della held Owen's hand throughout the prayer. It was the first time outside of work that her hand had simply rested in his, not because she had reached for a hammer or a doorknob or a paper crane. Wren stood between them and held the other hand of each. Snow had begun to fall again by the time the service ended. None of them spoke on the drive home. April. The thaw. The apple trees along Old Mill Road broke into white bloom. Della had filed for transfer from the Burlington bench to the Windham County bench. Same rank, same chambers level, closer geography. She kept a small apartment in Linden Hollow proper, but she spent most evenings at 14 Old Mill Road. Owen and Della did not make any formal announcement. They simply began living in the old wooden house together. Wren called Della Della, not Mom. That had been agreed without any conversation. Hannah was Wren's mother and would always be Wren's mother. Della was something else, something newer, that did not need a label. Owen opened a small law office in the converted shed where Marlon had spent his last months. The sign he hung beside the door read simply, "Bracket Law, Linden Hollow." Most of his clients were farmers, hourly workers, families who could not afford a Burlington firm. He took payment in cordwood, eggs, and raw honey when money was tight. Della founded a new pro bono program through the Windham County Court. The program offered representation for children in the foster system and unhoused minors. She named it the Lila Initiative. No one in the courthouse asked why. She did not explain. One Saturday afternoon, Wren held her 11th birthday party. The same age Della had been the night she walked out of the snow. 6 girls came over. They folded paper cranes at the kitchen table for 2 hours. Wren counted at the end. 37 old cranes on the window, 52 new ones, 89 in total. Owen and Della stood in the kitchen washing dishes after the guests had gone home. The kitchen smelled of leftover frosting and apple cider. Della rinsed plates. Owen dried. The spring evening was warm enough that the back door stood open and the call of evening sparrows came in from the orchard. Della asked, softly, "Do you ever think if that snowy night you hadn't gone out to the shed for that crowbar?" Owen did not let her finish. "I went out. That's the only thing that matters." She set the dish towel down. He turned. They kissed. It was the first time. Slow, without drama, as if they had done it 1,000 times in their minds across the months. In the living room, Wren glanced through the gap in the kitchen door, smiled, and went back to her friends without a word. Later that night, in her notebook, she wrote one line. Today was a good day. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back from the house then. Old Mill Road in the late afternoon. The apple blossoms, the yellow light along the edge of the trees. On the porch, set side by side, were 2 pairs of shoes, the small brown leather pair Owen had repaired 12 winters ago, and Della's plain black work shoes, set down when she had come in from the yard. A small collection of time, arranged without ceremony. 12 years before, a man had opened his door to a child whose name he did not know. 12 years later, the child had come back and had opened the door of the man himself. Neither of them had known they were waiting for the other. Perhaps that was how the best things had always happened. Neither of them had ever gone looking.